Art of the Zodiac presents Talk. Instagram's been kind of a jerk, but we're gonna ride that one out because we are live. And hello, everyone. I am Vivi Henriette of Art of the Zodiac. I am here today with my guest host, Cameron Steele of Interruptions, and our very, 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 very special guest, Alicia Kennedy, a writer who really needs no introduction. But actually, if you want to give one, Cameron, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Alicia is a food and culture writer with over 30,000 subscribers, readers on for her newsletter on Substack. She has written the book No Meat Required: the history and future of plant-based eating in the United States. And she has a forthcoming book on the making of my appetites. And we're here to talk about her writing process, her writing career, her Mercury and Sagittarius placement, and her role as an inspirational and artful and just really moving writer in the culture right now.
I've been tasked with kicking off this interview because Cameron has put together some really thoughtful and serious, good questions. So I'm going to kick this off with Alicia. What did you eat for breakfast this morning?
I had a smoothie. I freeze a lot of bananas. I here in Puerto Rico and San Juan, and there's a lot of bananas. And so I buy a ton of bananas at once, and then I freeze them, and then every morning I blend up a banana, some soy milk, and some peanut butter, and that's my breakfast.
Okay. So same thing early morning.
The same thing pretty much every morning, except on the weekends when I have eggs, and toast and a croissant, and it's more extravagant. Yeah.
I'm going to get the follow-up question. Is there an exciting lunch to be had today?
I also during the week eat the same lunch. So I'm like a very regimented person with my weekdays. And so for lunch lately, well, for weeks, the kids would call it a hyperfixation meal, I suppose, but for me, it just makes sense. So we've been getting a lot of good cabbage. So I shred cabbage, I quick pickle it. So I really like that as my salad green because it stays fresh really long. And so I can just do a huge batch of that and I have it for weeks. And lately I've just been doing kind of like a bed of Greek yogurt for like protein and stuff. And then quick pickled salad, like a soft boiled egg, and drizzle that with olive oil, flaky salt, maybe some Calabrian chilies, and I'll eat that. And then sometimes I have like a flatbread. Like today I had leftover flatbread, so I had that with it too. Yeah.
Yeah. Alicia, actually recently, you mentioned this in a recent essay about how you've switched your regimen from eating oatmeal every morning to the smoothie. And so one of the reasons why I love reading Alicia's work every week is, we're going to really get into it about like the stunning writing. And I have so many questions about how you're working on this book and also producing the kind of work you're able to produce every week outside of the writing of the book. But one of the other reasons I love following Alicia work is because it inspires me for like how to switch up my own sort of rituals and regimens and the things that I'm eating week in, week out. So pretty cool. Hers is always better than mine, but it's like, oh, yeah, of course.
No,
Right.
because I feel like a very boring eater, even though I'm a food writer. Like I feel like I eat very, but I try to just, I keep things very simple.
Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't call it boring, but one of the things that it was interesting to me about when you were talking about how like you just sort of had to eat the oatmeal because it was like but would do the job. It helped you sort of through the stress of finishing no meat required. And I was thinking like, yeah, like, I mean, in astrology, I don't know why I'm rolling my eyes at that. I like believe in astrology, but in astrology, like we think of oatmeal as being ruled by Saturn, and Saturn is like this energy or force of like just like getting down to work, doing the job, like getting it all done, getting nourished, like there's no frills, and so I immediately thought of that when you were writing about that, and now sort of moving into your smoothie era. I'm like, oh, I wonder how that's happening with this new book, this new process.
Yeah. I had the same thought exactly. And I'm also just laughing because we're both just, we came in as representatives of Saturn today in all black.
Three of us, yeah. Yeah.
And I'm also curious to know, like, on that same sort of in that question, besides just finishing the book, like, what was the decision to move from oatmeal to smoothie? Did it come with like maybe a lightness in your life? There was like, I can feel some more joy now.
Absolutely. Like, I think that I got really attached to oatmeal, but then like what happened was I just really lost my taste for it to the point that I couldn't finish the bowl of oatmeal. And like I wrote about this in the piece that I felt like sort of bad about that. Like I was losing my appetite and I was losing like some sort of zest for life, or like I don't know what I thought I was losing, because when I switched to the smoothie, which is hilarious because I switched to the smoothie after I interviewed Giselle Bundchen. Like I am loath to admit that talking to Giselle and like writing about Giselle made me like, because she has a cookbook coming out, and she had this other memoir come out about like how she changed her food habits to get out of a period of depression and anxiety. And I was like, you know what, like I used to drink smoothies, I associated them with a time of like deprivation in my life, but then I was like, you know what, let me try it again. Like I was getting back into buying soy milk because I like, soy is really the best non-dairy dairy anyway, protein reasons, all sorts of reasons. And I had all these bananas, and I was just like, why aren't I just drinking a smoothie? And then when I did this switch, I felt so much better. And then I felt bad about feeling better drinking a smoothie than oatmeal, because then I'm like, am I buying into like diet culture? Am I being like a bad feminist, like a bad person for drinking a smoothie? And then it's like, you know what, get over it, because the way your body feels right now, it doesn't want oatmeal, it wants a smoothie. And since I have ample freaking bananas here, there's no reason I shouldn't be drinking a smoothie. So like, yeah, it was an interesting like gradual shift that I really did have to make peace with. And sometimes it feels silly to write essays about like simple things like switching up your breakfast, but I do feel like people sort of need the permission to change sometimes. And I think that even with like these simple things that we sort of take for granted or we just do by habit, sometimes you don't want to change it because it feels like too much of a fuss in your life, or it feels like reflective of a time in your life when you weren't happy or something like that. And then, but different contexts shift the meanings of even just the food we eat. And so I think that it makes sense to kind of go through the process like that. And I haven't mentioned that to anyone outside of like my like immediate like family, that like it really was Giselle's influence, but it was.
I love that. And I mean, I think it's really interesting too, because it touches on something that I think that your writing does so well. And I mean, I know that it's also been sort of circling in conversations in food writing in general right now, but it also connects to some of the things that Vivi and I are trying to do, this thinking about astrology as storytelling, and not just as like, you look at a chart and a planet means one thing. It's a product. It's like a set thing that like, it has calcified, but instead is like something that has a story we can tell about it, and stories that can be shifted or expanded, and how that changes. And I just like know from the food writing aspect of it, like there's been a lot of conversation which you've been writing and talking about for many years now, which is this idea of food as story and as food as narrative, and how important and powerful that is. I mean, it can be sort of wielded for good or ill, or in between, versus, recipe writing as like this product to be consumed, which is really, really neat. Um, but speaking of your writing process, and so this is going to be kind of a long question. I'm trying to be David Naiman. I cannot be David Naiman, but I have to try for a minute, just because it's I like get to ask you about things that are in my head about your writing a lot. But I think one of the amazing things about your writing is that it is so inspiring, and it's also like compulsively like emulatable. And what I mean by that is that like you have this innate skill in your newsletter, in your book, in your reported pieces, where the writing is so artful that you kind of make it seem effortless. And so there's this like ability you have to weave style with voice, with staying with the questions rather than forcing these overwrought answers or simplified conclusions. And because you talk about the writing process a lot and you seem to enjoy it, and both in how you talk about it in the writing itself, and also on social media, I think that you inspire people to want to approach writing themselves as something that can be fun as well as necessary and meaningful. But one of the things that I've wondered about this is, I've just been like wondering whether it's sort of created this illusion that writing has come easily to you. So I want to ask you about that, sort of by way of these interactions with a couple of your essays. And also just because there's this whole spate of new Substack writers, like me included, who are literally structuring like work in terms of content and form based on the sort of path that you've paved. So thinking in this vein, but then also thinking you have this Mercury and Sagittarius placement, which in astrology is kind of a stressed out Mercury because it's on this very powerful fixed star called Antares. And Antares is this star of having to ruthlessly create your own opportunities for success, but then also like making it kind of seem effortless too, like when it's finished. And so I wanted to pull a few quotes from essays you've published over the years that I think highlight an under-examined aspect of how I viewed your career, for one, and also as a way to ask you about your own experience of moving into this position of a widely respected, award-winning culture writer in the year of our Lord 2024. Okay. So the first is this quote from a May 2021 essay you wrote on ideas. And you say, quote, "I did make a choice to be a freelance writer, to take on, as Angela McRobbie calls it in her book, Be Creative, Risk-Laden Self-Employment. I had a job as the senior digital copy editor at a very successful magazine, but I left because it made me feel small and stupid. Few of the editors were very nice, and my every small oversight was regarded as a massive failure, which was causing me massive anxiety. As I was turning 30, I felt I had to prove I could be a writer. I felt I had to prove that I was as smart as the people whose writing I corrected who didn't respect me at all." And this seems to resonate with a section of your February 22 essay on productivity, where you write, quote, "There's so much tension in doing creative work right now, as there should be. I don't think every piece of writing or art needs to bring us back to the fact of the world in crisis. Please, Lord, no. But I do think it should be somewhere in the atmosphere if someone is writing nonfiction about our contemporary conditions. This is why so much writing about work and attention and productivity has rung hollow and false for me lately. Basically, I guess I'd like a little less conversation about whether it's okay to work and how much, seeing as most of us simply have to work, and more conversation about how that work can do something, how it can tell new stories and better stories, more true stories, rather than serve power." And that just resonates with me so much. And lastly, from here, I just want to go to the opening of your brief essay on publicity that reflected on the experience of your book tour after No Meat Required came out No Meat Required came out this summer. So you begin this reflection by writing, quote, "There's nothing I've longed for in my adult life with the fervor of an adolescent, much like playing the role of author of a book. I will admit this to you despite how embarrassing it is. There were no white wedding nor corner office fantasies for me, just book. I even calculated whether my first NPR appearance was at an age younger than David Sedaris's. It was. As though as though this were an indicator of my own future success. I'm a writer. I've been a writer for more than 8 years. I've made a living from words for 14, but I had no idea what it would actually be like when I was an author. I daydreamed. I pictured the press. I assumed there would be photo shoots. There have been none." So that's my very long-winded way of asking, how does the creative work feel right now for you as you're drafting your second book and also publishing um, 7 newsletters a month on Substack? How did you get here from the Alicia of your childhood, or even sort of the Alicia on the cusp of publishing No Meat Required?
Right. Well, that almost made me cry. Well, one, I don't remember like so much of anything I've written for the newsletter. Like I literally put it out and then it's gone, and then I barely will look back unless I have to. Like unless I'm like, oh, I think I wrote about this before.
Yeah.
Every time someone brings back like lines to me, like the first one that you read, like that I haven't thought about in so long, like it was going to make me cry, and so I'm like, especially because in the manuscript for the new book, I'm definitely like I'm almost at the point where I have to write about that moment. I like
Mm.
um sort of the new book kind of comes in and out of memoir and like kind of I guess more ecological writing and culture writing and that sort of thing. But yeah, the thing for me is that I think I've tried really hard not to think about what other people are thinking about me as a writer necessarily. Like obviously there's to some extent I have to. But I've also like in very like practical ways, I've very much cut myself off from having like personal people having sort of personal access to me or too much access to me, like to basically for like someone I have never spoken to before, they either have to be a paid subscriber to comment, which people have very various reactions to, or like email me at my actual email address. So even though like 36,000 or whatever people are getting an email, like the only people who can really reply to it are like the 2,000 something who pay to subscribe. And so if you find my email, then you can kind of ruin my day, I say all the time, but like other than that you can't. But it's hard to because and it's something that's like given me so much sympathy for people who I used to think of as very successful and powerful, I suppose. Like where I would look at someone's career and be like, oh, they have all this shit together. Everything must be working out really well for them. And there's no reason that they can't like take a stand on XYZ. Why can't they, make better decisions or say this if they have this power or whatever it is. Obviously I don't have institutional power in a real way. Like I have, my new book is under contract with Hachette, and so that's nice. But like I haven't gotten, large advances for my first book or for this book. And so like I very much have to, I'm not taking assignments right now, which is actually like it's the best thing for writing the new book, but it's the worst thing for paying bills. So I'm like really just relying solely on the newsletter to kind of keep me afloat. Which is, I mean, I'm lucky to have a newsletter to keep me afloat. So like I have no complaints about that. But at the same time, yeah. So like, the question is about, which you also know I've written about how I get very distracted on the fly speaking, in public and also in private, frankly. Like I'll go off on a tangent, but I, yeah, like I'm really focused on making this book like the book that I've I really want it to be. And so part of that is that I have to sort of take this hit and like really do the work on it. And the I mean, yeah, and I'm finding it so much easier to write, not because I think it's an easier book to write than No Meat Required was. Frankly, in a lot of ways, No Meat Required should have been a very easy book to write. And I think from this vantage point, I look back on it, and I think, I wrote it, during the kind of height of the pandemic and I think that stress that put so much stress on me as a human being as it put so much stress on all of us as human beings. And also I had envisioned a certain way. I think maybe this is a constant in my writing too, is that I'm always like kind of butting up against what my vision for something would be and what the reality is. And the first book was certainly like a freaking huge reality check. The photo shoots, there were none. What I'm not Linda Jameson, or Zadie Smith, but you know, the fact of having to write it then, like, and in the new book, I also have a much like more communicative relationship with my editor. So there's like just feels a little bit more of a support system. Also, I can breathe. Sort of, I have a process down for how to write a longer project, whereas before I was like, I've lived my writing life, between 800 to 5,000 words, and so how the hell do I hold a thought for 70,000 words? And so now I know I can do it. Now I can be like, oh, like I can focus on the actual writing of it. And then in terms of like the newsletter and doing it simultaneously, the funny thing about the newsletter is that I had an idea for like today's newsletter, for example, that I thought was more of a strong idea, but I wasn't locking into a way to start it that I liked. And like for me, I'm really like once I have a good first line, I'm kind of into it. And then that like that's all I need, and then I'm keep going. And then I'll go back obviously and add things, strip things down, whatever it needs to be done. But like, if I am not excited from like the first line, then I can't keep writing, frankly. And so, and that's been my thing forever. Like even writing like crappy pieces for $250 about like a cocktail, I would be like, okay, like once I have the first line, I can do the piece. But so like frankly, like the newsletter, and I don't, I put a lot of time into it in the aggregate, but I feel like, these are ideas that kind of come to me and then I sit down and write them. And, I feel like I really, in terms of writing it, I don't spend as much time on it as maybe, and I wouldn't say as I should, I would say as maybe people might expect I do or something like that. But like, so for me, it fits really seamlessly into working on the book because it sort of just gives me a break to get into something more immediate, especially because the book is so based in my past and also like things that are sort of evergreen and not changing. And so the newsletter is my way of kind of keeping a conversation going in real time. And so they really kind of feed off of each other in that way where, I need both. I need like both ways of doing things in order to stay like engaged. But I don't know if I answered the question at all.
Well,
I mean, do I feel different now than I like when I was that person who needed to quit working at NY Mag as a copy editor because I like was losing my mind. And like I told someone last that I used to work with that I was like, I wouldn't have quit if I could see, like, if I could have seen the future, I wouldn't have quit. Like, I would have just kept my head down, done that job, freelanced on the side. But because that I was like young and I was in this very volatile moment in my personal life and that sort of thing. And I was like, I basically, and because I was among all of those people who'd like gone to Harvard and Yale, and I didn't know in a real way that the people around me in this industry were usually not just making a living from their jobs. Like there was money somewhere else in their lives. I didn't realize that. So I just thought, oh, basically I'm the copy editor because I didn't think it was so much to do with the class situation as it was. Like in hindsight, I see that, but in the moment, I couldn't see it. For me, it was really just a meritocratic notion that was very, very false. And so I basically, was like, well, I have to prove that I can make a living as a writer, and I did, and like I've proven that. Yay me! I have no stability whatsoever. But like, and so I'm happy that I did that for that reason. Like, I wouldn't be where I am if I hadn't like had to really hustle and do so much work and do everything myself to get myself to where I am. But at the same time, I wish I had a deeper understanding and wasn't so kind of chaotic and dysfunctional. But if I was not so chaotic and dysfunctional at the age of 29, I wouldn't be who I am now. So, at the end of the day, it is what it is.
I want to jump in with a question there, actually, two questions. You said, if I could have seen the future, I wouldn't have quit.
Yeah.
What do you think would have been different? Okay, I'm going to hand you two questions at once because this is how my broken Mercury works, right? So, what do you think it would have looked like if you didn't quit? Where would you be? And the other question is, you said you were working with all these people who went to, Ivy League schools. Like, what was your background?
So I went to Fordham University, which is a Jesuit school in New York City, and a great school, no complaints about it. But it is funny because, like, in a lot of pop culture around like New York and like Fordham is depicted, and I am from Long Island. I am Bridge and Tunnel. Like it's for Bridge and Tunnel people. It's for like the Irish and Italians. It's for people who like want to be a little bit better than like their dad who was a cop, which is me. And so like, and so it's depicted in that way. And it's always like, I'll never forget, there was a novel by Gary Steingart called Lake Success, which is a town on Long Island. And the main character is obsessed with watches, and he like reads a cop buy a watch that he's wearing and says, oh, he probably went to Fordham. And like there's like a really great scene on I'm outing myself as a I'm always talking about Law and Order, but like, it's rich text really. But there's a character there who goes to Fordham, and like one higher end lawyer tells him like, they don't teach you how to belong, and I can smell the garlic and the flop sweat coming off of you. So like I went to a very good university, but like within the context of New York and like people who think about these things, like I realized after the fact that I went to a school that was like for like my people of like and so and like honestly, like and this is like I'm very American of me, but like I just didn't have a real understanding of class in a real way, like in how it functioned. Like I really bought into like, you work hard, you go to school, things will work out for you. Like I just did not know that there were all these other things going on. But the way that I got to NY Mag is that I got fired. I recently just I got fired. So I had this terrible job after college at a offshore medical school, like their office on Long Island. I was in the publications department, so I was like in InDesign and like making sure the grammar was right and proofreading things. And my parents got divorced during that time, and I got into like I was a bit of a depression, and like I started showing up to work and being like, fuck this, like a 13-year-old again, being like, why am I doing this? What is the meaning of this? What is the meaning of life? Why am I here? So I'd like go to meetings and like, I don't know, I think like I just stopped. I never really wore makeup, so I don't know if I stopped wearing makeup, but I just probably looked like shit and wasn't happy to be there. And I can never hide how unhappy I am on my face. So they fired me. And I applied to like a million jobs. The only job that got back to me was NY, and I'll explain why later. But NY Mag got back to me for a copy editor job, a freelance copy editor job, and I was like, "What? Holy shit, great!" So I go into the city, I take the copy test. I follow up a week later. They're like, "Yeah, you did great. Come in." like basically I did get into media on a meritocratic basis. I took a test. And the reason that it was so easy that the first day I was there as a freelancer, they were like, "Do you want a full-time job?" Is that it was a really, really, really hard job of like spending 10 hours, literally 10 hours your shift was, which is illegal. And just reading all day. Like you could barely go to the bathroom. You couldn't really take lunch. It was tens of thousands of words every single day that you were copy editing. So it was a terrible job, like terrible. But like for me, it was the only way in. And so I just stayed. And then eventually, like I could work from home. So then it was great to stay there. Like, so I'm a very like old, I've worked from home since 2010. So like I could never go to an office every day again. But like so that was my way in, was by taking that test, doing well on it, showing up the first day and just being like inordinately good at it, like without really like, I don't want to say I wasn't trying. Like I had spent my whole life like reading and all I could understand as a copy editor was that transferred into this. Like I was able to read and be like, no, this isn't right. Was I like a technical copy editor who was good at it on like a technical basis? I got better at it, but like I started out as just being like a very like I knew what the sentences were supposed to be like, and so I just did that. And I knew what a style guide was. Like I've always just learned everything by just kind of cobbling things together and getting the clues of everyone else's behavior. But yeah, that was how I ended up at NY Mag, and then eventually learned that it wasn't a meritocracy.
But what do you think at the end? Because it's interesting, because you're like, okay, you're working these 10-hour days, but you said before that if you could see the future, you would have stayed there. What do you think that imaginary future would have been?
Well, so when I became like, the person who hired me left, so I became the senior copy editor. And then like we won some small victories basically because no one was going to keep the job if it was staying in those conditions. So like we had some like staggered shifts, we took lunch breaks, like we changed kind of the culture of it. This was before like all the media organizations started to unionize. And so, it got better towards the end, but at the same time, like from what Cameron read, I would like go to happy hour with friends who literally were like, one is a public high school like math teacher in New York City, the other is a freaking nurse. And I would be like hysterical because I missed a homophone error. And I couldn't live like that anymore. And just like every day I would tell people under me, like, we're not performing brain surgery. Like, don't worry. If like something goes out with a freaking comma askew, we'll fix it and it'll be fine. But at the same time, I was getting the message constantly that it's like, someone missed this, you missed this, blah blah blah. Like because I was the manager of the desk, so I was like responsible for every single little tiny error that someone noticed. And it was just like it got to a point where I couldn't do it. At the same time, if I knew what I knew now, obviously life would be completely different, everything would be different. But if I knew what I knew now and had like sort of a more assertive nature, which I have grown into, I just would have stayed and made it, continued to try and make it better, and had that stability while I also tried to freelance write on the side and make my name as a writer concurrently while having stability. But I just chose not to do that.
I just want to comment, and I'll be finished here, but that sounds like some harsh perfectionism on your part. Like, I decided I'm going to go and get better, do this job, and then do this whole other careers. Here, before I hand it over to Cameron.
Well, I mean, it's also, I mean, I've just kept thinking about, how like just that need to have the sort of the first line that feels compelling and right and exciting. I mean, yeah, also kudos to you on the first line of the Giselle piece. It was,
Shall say you.
But then how, like, if that first line doesn't feel like it's giving you sort of like the pull through into the narrative, it's hard to complete the vision. And, just to try to like really want to stay with just like the literary question too, but to pull it back a little bit into the vein of astrology, I was thinking about all of these things, like, and thinking about, so Mercury, right, is like the planet of right. Like that's why we're talking about Mercury here. It's the planet that rules writing and communication and like, how we do writing. And to have Mercury, and it's also this planet that's like really focused on the details, on the small, on like even sort of back to your first comment on like, maybe it seems I don't remember exactly how you said it, but like maybe it seems silly to be focused on like the small details of a life. And yet, like, that's exactly what Mercury is kind of focused on and like really wanting to pull, um, to think about as like the places in a life where, magic happens or connection happens or like love or art or like, also ruination and drama. Whereas, Sagittarius, which is where your Mercury is located, is this sign that is ruled by Jupiter. So it's focused on these grand visions and like, how do we pull the small details together? So, if it doesn't like necessarily cohere, it also like gives us this like future oriented aim or this new way of encountering these ideals of like hope or optimism or being together in the world. um and in astrology, like Mercury in Sagittarius gets a lot of smack because it's considered to be an exile. It's considered to be Mercury in its detriment, right, Vivi? Detriment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
detriment.
Like, yeah. Yes. My Mercury in Pisces had to think about that until I ended up.
And so like one of the annoying things that I think happens with astrology and like with astrologers is like people will look at a chart, like look at a chart and they'll see Mercury in Sagittarius and they'll be like, oh, that's not a dignified Mercury. That's an exiled Mercury. That's not a person like who can do much with Mercury. And yet like your writing is on fire. And like, but I'm also thinking about how you've described this sort of like needing to come up against class barriers, like, and not even realizing those barriers were in place, or come up against, of sort of media and crumbling around you as this becomes your profession. Or even just sort of on the sort of process or line level, like really needing to come up against this desire to have perfection, like at the line or sentence or even grammatical level, it seems, but then build that out, not just for 800 or 1,500 words now, but over, 70,000. So that's like, I guess, a long way of maybe like asking you, like, how have you, like, when did you know that you wanted to be a writer? And also like, as you've been a writer and as you write now, like how have you built confidence in your skill and your innate talent, but also how have you like been able to like change your writing as like you've grown as a writer?
Yeah, I think I always wanted to be a writer. I don't think I had a moment where I was like click writer, but because there were moments where I thought I wanted to be an astrophysicist. And so I was terrible at math. I don't know what I was thinking. Loved space though. And so here we are. But the constant for me was always reading, and the constant for like I loved music and I played the violin, and like music is really like my, if there's anything that I love with the like purity of heart, it is music. And so like, but at the same time, I knew I saw myself in like the narrators of novels who were writers. And I saw myself as like Jancy Dawn on MTV. And I saw myself in like, when I would read magazines and like I would see the contributor page and I would read their bios and I was like, that's who I want to be. Like, I want this life where it's like, I'm always doing something different and I'm always like reading and I'm always doing like different things. And then when I was in college, I didn't do any internships because I needed to actually make money. At the end of college, I bought this book called like the Anti 9 to 5 Guide, which kind of taught me everything about freelancing. So I set my first pitch, and I got my first byline like at Paste magazine, reviewing some sort of anthology or something like that. And interestingly, this kind of goes to how I felt when my book came out, but like I remember going to Borders after a shift at the magazine at the border. There used to be a Borders of a Penn Station, and I got the magazine in print, and I looked at my byline, and I thought it would change something in me, and it didn't. And that sort of is the reason I think I ended up having that baking interlude in my life, which is a whole other story. But like, I think I was like, this doesn't feel the way I thought it would feel. Maybe I need to anyway, and everything works out in the end. But um, yes, what was I saying? Yes. So how does writing feel now?
Yeah, so like the desire to be a writer, but then also like that sense of like, you and maybe another way to ask this too is like you've written really vividly over the last little while about like reflecting on the ways in which like there were definite class barriers to writing as a profession for you. Like you've written about like having to work all through college and like professors being assholes because like they're like, did you not reference this text in your essay? And you're like, dude, like it costs $80 to buy that book. Like,
Yeah.
so I'm wondering about like this, like, and like, so I'm thinking about it through the lens of like Mercury and Sagittarius, like having some sort of like, this need to like, or like this requirement to sort of like go your own way in some ways, like to figure it out for yourself and like have like that having created struggle. But then I'm also wondering how that has contributed to the way you've developed as a writer, like as some like how you learn, how you think, how you change your own sort of writing.
Yeah. No, it's interesting too because I don't want to give the perception that like I didn't like I grew up like solidly, middle class. Like there were no big struggles in my upbringing until college. Things changed economically in my family, but like we weren't rich, but we were completely fine. And so but at the same time, I think that the knowing that has given me like another understanding of just how bizarre like the expectations in media and publishing are, in that you can't even just be like a middle class Catholic school kid from Long Island and like have creativity and be a little smart and access these spaces. Like it's so difficult. Like the barrier to entry to getting to that place is so difficult. It requires these unpaid internships. It requires all of this work and attention and labor in terms of making connections and that sort of thing. And something I've literally never been good at is networking. But and so that really like it's an interesting thing to me to like, and I think that like even more so than anything is like has been sort of a radicalizing force in terms of how I perceive this work, and like why I kind of won't shut up about how it is work and how it does require money, and like access to capital is not something that everyone has equal, claims to. And so, yeah, it's definitely colored how I approach things. And then at the same time, like I think my writing has gotten so much better, frankly. Like I don't know, I would never say like, oh, I've read people recently being like, I'm a good writer, and I was like, those words would never come out of my mouth. And so I can see something where I've gotten like I personally like feel more in command of my voice now than I did when I started my newsletter, which was 4 years ago, almost like exactly, right at the beginning of the pandemic. And so I was definitely like so harsh and polemical and like rigid in the beginning, and like I don't even want to look at those things because I just but at the same time I also think it was a reflection of how bizarre the conditions were in the world. At the same but over time I think I've kind of softened and loosened into a voice that is a lot more like how I It's like how I actually speak, except better because it's way more considered. But and so it's been really good. I think having the challenge of having to write for myself, of like even you know having been like the successful newsletter, and like having more opportunities to write, having the opportunity to teach, like having more speaking opportunities and that sort of thing, like nothing's materialized into something that would give me the ability to stop writing the newsletter every week. And so like, but I don't, at the same time, I don't think I would want to stop doing it, because I do love having this like space where I kind of feel myself, I feel my voice changing and working. It's basically like, I basically like kind of am workshopping my own stuff every week, I guess, is what it's like. And getting to hear like, what people's favorite things are all the time. It's always something different. And that's always instructive too. Like, I don't really want to know anyone's thoughts on the quality of my writing on a week to week basis. Of course. But at the end of the day, like it is useful when I kind of do my disassociation in order to not internalize people's perceptions. But like someone said like last Friday's was their favorite piece of mine, and I was like, that's really funny because it's just something like came to me while I was like reading Vogue. And then I was like, let me and I was like, oh, that's cool actually, because that piece was really, really close to how I actually would like talk. And so it's really yeah, it's just really different all the time to find out what people like enjoy. But of course but also having to be detached from it. So yeah, it's definitely a really cool practice that I think I would want to keep doing, even if I didn't have to do it. But at the same time, I also understand that like, yes, my lot in life is to is to DIY and deal with that.
Yeah, no, thank you for those reflections, because you are like better getting at the sort of paradox that I was trying to sort of set up at the beginning when I was talking about like, there's this like halo of success that I think like gets put on your newsletter, and like totally. And also like, yeah, it seems like a lot of work, but it also seems like something that like um is like very near and dear to your heart, and like all these like it's just like it's like a complex thing. And I think as one of your readers, I really love like being able to like read about that complexity and sort of like witness it and sort of be carried along by it. So yeah.
May I jump in here?
Mhm.
We're really, I love that when Cameron, you pointed out Mercury being, I'm going to use astro techno terms. So for people who are not astrology people, just like bear with us for a moment. But this idea of Mercury being in exile, right? And you think about a planet in a difficult situation has problems being resourced. And even the Antares bit, right? About like needing to work extra hard. And it's so interesting hearing your story, because even though you've accomplished all these things, it seems like there's been constantly like having to almost go like, despite the institution, right? Like thinking about, you have a massive audience on Substack, which is like, okay, like working for the, I didn't make it as like a staff writer for a big magazine, but I'm just going to go get my own audience. That kind of like a way to like circumvent the system, because you're not sort of as resourced as everyone else.
But still has to say, or essay on Harper's Bazaar right now. And it also has like the feature essay in Harper's Bazaar right now. So
I know how to done all these big things, but I'm saying like, but it's on your own terms, right? So you had to go on your own terms. So like, that's all I'm saying, is that like, it seems like there's been a thing of like, I'm going to figure out how to break in the institution, not just because I've, had, rich parents or something, but because I'm going to like figure out these other ways of getting there. All of it to say, do you still, in some sense, even though you're about to have a second book coming out and you're, well known, like does part of you still, and you kind of mentioned this to the DIY, do you kind of still feel like you're maybe always be a bit of an outsider?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. It's hard to. I feel like it would be self-aggrandizing or like self-pitying to say yes. I also like, and frankly, like I really like doing things and figuring things out myself. Like I've just always done that, and so I don't don't really see, I don't know. And like and like frankly, I don't trust, other than like my mother would love for me to get a full-time job. um but like I have, I'm fine, and again, I'm also going to be turning 40 in a couple of years, so or next year. So I have that on my mind as this sort of like kind of artificial marker of like, yeah, I'll have 2 books out, successful newsletter, etc. But like in terms of, the material gains that one would have expected to sort of materialize by this point, like those are still sort of like things I'm figuring out. And there are things I just won't do. There are things I could have done with whatever like cultural capital people see me as having right now, like if I were good at those kinds of things. And I think I made this joke recently on Instagram where it was like I was literally like wrapping up giveaway books, because this is how I'm dealing with my overload of books, is to like do 3 book giveaways every month. Um, but I was like, someone else who is better at like business would have figured out a different way to monetize like over 30,000 like, but I don't know, like I'm just wrapping books in craft paper and mailing them out because I literally don't know like what I'm supposed to do other than like, am I supposed to get a brand deal with, Target? I don't like this isn't like that isn't like what I do, and it wouldn't serve what I do. And I do think like people, frankly, like I thought people were going to get mad at me for profiling Giselle, because like I just thought people would be like, that's so off brand and blah 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 blah, and like, but like people were just like, oh, this is at the intersection of all of my interests. And I was like, oh, that's great, okay. I just always think people are going to be like, but at the same time, there's no brand that I'm like, I did a jewelry collaboration with like a small jeweler who also made my wedding rings. Like I did a spice blend with Burlap and Barrel, who's like a single origin spice company. Like those kinds of things make sense to me. And there are certainly things that I, could, but like in terms of like, yeah, being resourced, I don't really know how to do it. And so I don't like, but at the same time, like, yeah, for me, it's just always like you just work and you do things and you have new ideas and you just keep like, I don't know, but I do think someone else would have come up with a better way of my of leveraging the readership, because I do, and like this isn't like I realize like I do like there's over 20,000 people read it literally in the first 24 hours every week. So like I should be doing something different, maybe. I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, it's reminding me, I have a lot of clients who are also writers. And one of, what you're talking about makes me think of them, because one of the themes that keeps coming up with these writers sort of over and over again over the past year, longer than that, but definitely over the past years, there's this like we all love Angela McRobbie and like, a certain kind of feminism that's very, very much critical of work and of hustle culture and of like the ways in which we commodify ourselves or have to commodify ourselves and our time endlessly to like, make ends meet. And at the same time, like there's this real, I don't know, like we have to go somewhere from there too. Like there is a little bit of, I don't know, just there's something of a disservice we do to ourselves, or like that just sort of only staying there. Like we have to figure, yeah, I don't know. These are sort of like tangential, streamy thoughts, but yeah.
No, I always feel like a jerk because I do love like, I don't think I love work. Like writing is my work. So then ergo, I love working. But like, I always have this weird relationship to the people who are like, oh, we should be like on the beach eating fruit all the time. I'm like, that's a nightmare to me.
Yeah. Well, I kind of have like one more like long question. If we want to go there, I wanted to ask that sort of like taking us into just like talking about the memoir that you're writing, and then we can close from there because we're almost at the end of the time. But one of the essays that Vivi and I were going to be teaching coming up in the 6-week course is one that you published at the beginning of the year, both Joyful and Killjoy, that seems to build on the themes of that 2022 essay on productivity that I quoted. I love both Joyful and Killjoy because it raises these complicated yet essential questions about how we live toward and with joy, while also acknowledging the world in crisis, while also acknowledging the limits of joy and pleasure and pleasure activism and all of that stuff. This essay of yours, it reached a lot of people. I mean, I watched it sort of be shared and engaged with, and then also inspire, you know, other thoughtful essays along these same themes and sort of all of these different corners of the internet that I'm part of. And, I think it set the tone for me too, like in my own writing, for thinking about how to, reckon with daily life and personal experience amidst the genocide in Gaza, which has really seemed to finally underscore like the falsities of American and global democracy for wider and wider swaths of people. So, like who can like pretend that the US is virtuous at this point in time? Anyway, I wanted to quote from a section of both Joyful and Killjoy that really struck a chord with me. And so you write, quote, "We have to figure out a productive way to engage with the world as it is in order to work towards the world that we want. Do we use joy for that? When people ask, am I allowed to feel joy right now while I know of and empathize with and am enraged by the pain being experienced by others? We have to say yes. The way forward is honesty about the coexistence of it all, of forward movement with the messiness. What is happening in Gaza, of course, tests the limits of this. I've long believed really that people have the power. Now I'm not so sure, and if I'm honest, living in Puerto Rico has not served this belief. Seeing colonialism and its enforcement up close, geographically, economically, and psychologically doesn't serve hope. That's their point. Who has to find hope and resilience despite horror? Whose joy isn't a fine act of insurrection, but a necessary expression of the will to live, despite the suppression of actual insurrection and liberation?" And I think this essay is really enacting that 2022 call of yours for stories that tell the truth, however messy, rather than stories that serve power. And I also think that it's interesting to think about this in the vein of your Mercury and Sagittarius, quite literally as a writer who lives in a land that is both exiled and abused by the mechanisms of colonialism. And so I was thinking about place and like thinking about the way place figured in No Meat Required too. And so I wanted to ask, how does place figure into your new book? Or if you'd rather to go in a different direction, what are the ways in which you're working with themes of joy and power and working towards a better world in the memoir?
Well, so place is a huge role in the new book, and I'm glad to hear you say place has a bigger role in No Meat Required. Like honestly, like I have not gone back to the book in a while. I'll deal with eventually. I will, but like I told my mom that whenever I was opening it, I felt like reading it felt like I had locked someone in a closet and said, "I'm going to tell you everything I think about food." And I was like, I can't read it because it's too much. Like it's like my brain in a place and just like a very contained space. And I was just like, this is horrifying that I've done more than that. Like, anyway, what is writing? But
I
like,
was gonna say though, like my experience of reading Nemi, or I mean, like I read that book and I was so I was so sick. I was just like coming off of chemotherapy, and I just remember sitting on my porch in the sun, like reading that book, and just like feeling like the possibility of the world. Like it. So, anyways,
thank you.
but
Thank you. Thank you. Well, yeah, place has a huge role in the new one because I was thinking about making it more literally about place, but then I think it's just very present that like I am from Long Island, and I'm trying to sort of piece together not just myself, but like my ancestry and how it came to be me. And then also, of course, Puerto Rico is present because my grandmother is from here, and also because obviously I'm here now. And like I just kind of kept getting called back here in sort of a way. And then yeah. And I think that it's been important for me to be here as a writer because like so much food writing is so like what I wrote about last Friday. It's like these $19 eggs and that sort of thing. Or it's like here's a guide to all these like very specific restaurants in a city or something like that, and I'm like, you can't do that here. Like like food is very significant here, but it's also like the idea of like a culinary scene is extremely different here, and I think it's been really good for me to kind of get out of that headspace after spending literally the first 33 years of my life in New York and just being very spoiled by everything. And so like place is very significant in the next one, just as a sort of grounding force and as sort of a question, like because I a big question of my work and I guess of my life is like what does it mean to be like, I don't want to say nothing, but like, what does it mean to like have a fragmented identity in terms of ancestry, in terms of race, in terms of like these things, like all of these things that mean a lot to people, like, or that seem to mean a lot to people, their identity and their ancestral claims to things. Like, I don't have those in the same way that I think, or the way that I perceive other people to have them. And so trying to kind of reckon with what that means and using food to do it, which is what I've always done. And so the new book kind of like it's a memoir with me, and it's also like a kind of memoir of my family, but it's also like how food, how these like specific foods and also non-specific foods have kind of come together to they come together to like compose a person even when these other things aren't there. Like the way we eat is also, you know, a product of so many different movements and different, and I mean literal like geographic movements, and a product of, you know, our the taste of our the people who came before us and what they had access to, and also it's a force of like colonialism. Like why are plantains such an important part of my life? And it's, you know, they got moved from Africa to the Caribbean and that sort of thing. And so talking about all of those things and like, you know, yeah, what it means to kind of make a self out of literal ingredients versus, you know, the kind of ways that you're expected to make yourself out of. So yeah, the place definitely has a huge role in it, both historically and in the present, and ideally in the future. And obviously being a person of like islands, like long, like no one thinks of Long Island as an island because it doesn't have palm trees, but like it's an island. And Puerto Rico, and obviously Manhattan, very important to my entire upbringing and self identity. But like these places are, you know, dealing when we're dealing with climate change, you know, these are going to be the first places to be underwater. And so it seems like an important like way of reconciling with that. Yeah. And definitely New York is huge in it, obviously, like just as an idea, like the idea of New York as this place where everybody comes to be a different person and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I can't wait to read it.
Do you want to talk a little bit about our upcoming course?
So we're teaching a 6-week course called The Fire at Night, storytelling with beyond and through astrology. And I don't know why I'm doing that motion. That's what we're teaching. We are going to be close reading the essays and the charts of brilliant past and present nonfiction writers like Alicia and Audre Lorde and Rachel Ann Jolie, who we'll be interviewing next Monday, and Simone Weil, among a few others. And it'll also, so there'll be lectures every Monday and also workshops. So I'll be putting on my former university professor hat and helping class participants, workshop, whatever writing they want to bring to the table. So
I'm so excited about it, and I'm so excited. I have to say that because of this, I'm familiar with you. I was introduced to your work, Alicia. So yeah, and
Amazing.
I just my final comment is I was like, as someone who thought I had a very considered myself to be a person thoughtful about my diet, a former restaurateur myself and such. I mean, I think about food a lot. Reading your book was the first I don't know, book promoting maybe a vegan lifestyle where I didn't feel shame for eating chicken. I was like, oh, it's okay. Like, yeah, I don't know. I did it. I love that so much. I feel like that's a huge accomplishment we haven't even named.
Oh,
You wrote it. Plans that doesn't make anyone feel shame. That was a beautiful thing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. With that, do we miss any questions? I have a last question. Can I lighten this up? Well, another thing. What's your least favorite vegetable?
Me, I'm the worst person to ask that question because I love everything. I'm trying to think. I can't say. I don't think I've encountered it yet. What?
Fruit? Is there any food item besides plant-based?
I mean,
animal
even frankly, in terms of even liking or enjoying, I wouldn't even say I don't like, meat. Like I try. So I really, and I don't think there's anything I don't. When I was a kid, I hated meatloaf, like the loaf of it.
mm-hmm.
I don't American cheese.
My kid calls that dog cheese because that's how he gives the dogs their pills.
Oh my God. I love plastic cheese. Your kid and I have a lot in common because I called it plastic cheese the other day.
There are no parents, no other adults, no one to interfere with the fun.